The Boston Celtics have a worse record than the New York Knicks. Let's just let that sit in. A worse record than the New York Knicks, a team that we've been clowning on, criticizing, and roasting for the past 5-10 years. Right? So that's why we have to take a deep dive in analyzing what is wrong with the Boston Celtics. They have so much talent. They have Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. They have Brad Stevens. Brad Stevens, just a couple years ago, was considered a young, up-and-coming basketball genius to the likes of Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan. So what's happening with the Celtics in the 2020-2021 season? And you don't really have to look further than the roster construction to already identify some pretty big problems within the Boston Celtics. And at the end of the day, there's two versions of the Boston Celtics. The first version is two All-Stars who have carried the expectations of having reached the conference finals 3 of the past 4 years. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And the other version of the Celtics are 8 first or second year players who have mostly never been able to earn consistent minutes in any rotation. You see, this division has been a leading reason why the Celtics sit on a disappointing 23-25 record and 8th in a weak Eastern Conference. There's too much reliance on Brown and Tatum. They carry too much weight of the offense. Also, remember, Brown and Tatum are known as two-way players. They also play their hardest on defense. So, it's really hard for them to do everything on the court. Moreover, I understand they're really young, and something that they do have to improve on is playmaking. Especially someone like Jaylen Brown, they have to start, in the offense have a more complete role, like having a more facilitative role. Now, granted, I understand that they shouldn't really have to have such a reliance on playmaking because that duty should go on starting point guard Kemba Walker, who has been disappointing. I understand it's not his fault. It's not like he's lazy. It's not like he's not working hard. It's just he's been hurt. And he isn't a max level player who is given max money. He's been very inconsistent, having some games doing pretty well, but some games just putting up duds. And that has really compromised the Boston Celtics' ability to put together a lot of wins. Just the fact that Kemba Walker isn't a consistent player, especially because of the money he's making. A big criticism that people had about the Kemba Walker signing is, why didn't you just use that $35 million on 3 or 4 role players? That would put the roster at a better position. Like, for example, not saying these people would sign there, but what if you got like Malcolm Brogdon, who would have taken $20 million? You get another solid backup big, and you get a couple solid veteran 3-and-D pieces, right? Those 4 players combined, in my opinion, would provide more value to the roster of the Boston Celtics than Kemba Walker, right? And then moving on from positions 1, 2, 3, 4, now we go to the 5, and yes, there is a big hole at center. Daniel Tice just got moved. Robert Williams, Mo Wagner, like those guys, Tristan Thompson, like those guys are simply not cutting it. Especially in the East, when there's big guys tearing apart the league. Vucevic, Embiid, not Jokic, Giannis. I would even include a guy like Kevin Durant. Like, when you have a problem at center in the Eastern Conference and in the Western Conference, that really compromises your ability to play defense, play offense, etc. And they've just never been able to resolve this problem. And I guess at the end of the day, my biggest problem with the Celtics roster construction is it doesn't feel like a team. It just feels like a hodgepodge of guys, veterans, unproven players, etc. They aren't a team. They're just kind of wearing the same jersey that have the big C on the back. And like, Okay, I don't think it's like in 2018, 2019 with Kyrie when everyone like low-key hated each other. I think everybody likes each other. I think everybody's fine. But for some reason, on the court, their talents and their abilities just aren't meshing together, right? And I guess that falls under the responsibility of head coach Brad Stevens. Now, I mentioned in the introduction that when Brad Stevens entered the league from Duke, he was considered this rising star who had genius master plans, who put together game plans that were innovative and got a lot of wins, right? And, like I've been seeing a lot of things on the internet talking about like, oh, the Celtics should fire Brad Stevens. He's just not good anymore. I'm not in that camp. I still think Brad Stevens is a really good coach. And I absolutely think he should not get fired. Because if he does get fired, number one, they don't have anyone to replace him. And number two, another team is going to pick him up real quick, right? But I still think Brad Stevens has to hold responsibility. This isn't the first time it's kind of felt that something's off. I guess that's the only way I could put it. That the team just doesn't feel right. And maybe Brad Stevens, as good as he is creating game plans, he's having trouble controlling the temperature of the room, I guess. Now, obviously, I've never been in that locker room. I don't know Brad Stevens personally, obviously. But that's just what it looks like from the outside looking in. I don't think Brad Stevens' job is in danger. Now, if we get to the end of the year, and this is how it is the whole year, and they get bounced in the first round, then maybe we'll have a discussion if Brad Stevens' job is somehow in danger. But as of now, it is definitely not in danger, but he still has to get critiqued. He still has to get looked at and question what he can do better. Now, to be more specific, something I've noticed is in Brad Stevens' first 3 years, he put together a game plan that emphasized ball movement, team ball, and elevating role players to stars, right? Like that was Brad Stevens' trademark. His trademark was elevating players that were only role players to players who were really good and passing the ball a lot. But for some reason, that mentality seems to have kind of gone away this year. Like, I'm seeing more I'm seeing a lot of ISO ball. Kind of like when Kyrie Irving was there, when there was a lot of ISO ball and it wasn't working. I'm seeing not as many passes. And I'm not really seeing that elevation of role players that I've seen Brad Stevens done in the past. That's why I'm a little confused about like what changed, right? Because for the Kyrie situation, I understand. There's a big ego. He demands the ball. But that's not really how it is this year. So I'm a little confused why Brad Stevens would step away from things that have worked for him in the past. Hopefully, there's a lot of the season left, so he can still make adjustments. But I don't know. That's something I just wanted to throw out there. Something I've noticed about how Brad Stevens isn't doing Brad Stevens things. Now, maybe it's the COVID schedule. Maybe it's just how weird the scheduling is, how there's less practice, there's less time between games, there's more restrictions, more travel, stressful travel, etc. Maybe that's what's throwing him off, but that's just something to notice about Brad Stevens. Now, another part of Brad Stevens' game plan is defense. Usually the Celtics are a really good defensive team, but for some reason, that is not the case this year. Their defense has been pretty atrocious, right? So I'm about to go full nerd, talk about a lot of statistics on this defensive segment, but basically they have the 21st ranked defensive rating, which is not good, right? If you want to be a contending team, you want to be in top 10 in everything, right? So they have no big guy in the interior, which is of course a problem. And they're having a lot of trouble containing guys, right? And I think the two statistics that really hammer the Celtics struggles home are opponent field goals attempts and opponent field goal made. What do I mean? Statistic number one that I want to touch on is opponents FGA a game, field goal attempts. And on defense, the Boston Celtics are allowing 85.7 field goal attempts a game, which is third in the NBA. What does this tell me? If you're allowing a lot of field goal attempts, that means you're not bothering offensive players. You're not bothering them. You're allowing them to take more shots. You're not forcing them to change up plays. You're allowing them to easily get shots off, right? Which is already a problem, right? Because when you're allowing players on the opponent's team to shoot more, that usually means you're not really bothering them. And this is compounded by the second statistic about how opponents of the Boston Celtics are making 40 field goals a game, which is sixth in the NBA, right? So that means not only are you not making people uncomfortable, they are making those shots, right? So those two statistics together, I think, epitomize the struggles the Celtics are having on defense. They are allowing a lot of shots, and they are allowing a lot of shots to be made, right? I understand Marcus Smart was out for 1 or 2 months. He is a defensive anchor. Still, at the end of the day, you can't be allowing the third most field goal attempts and the sixth most field goal attempts made. That is just unacceptable, especially in a Brad Stevens system. Brad Stevens prides himself in defenses that can lock opponents up, that are switchable, and are very versatile in stopping different types of plays, right? And I'm used to seeing Boston in high placements when it comes to defense. This is just super absurd that their defense can fall off a cliff this quick, right? But maybe it's not so absurd, because then we have to look at who is constructing the roster. And that person is Danny Ainge. And unfortunately, we have to give a lot of criticism to Danny Ainge and how he constructed the roster this year, right? Now, before we can know about the 2020-2021 season, we have to have some context, right? Everything is in context. So let's look at a couple years ago with free agency, right? And I just want to say right off the bat, Danny Ainge has kind of made a lot of key draft and free agency mistakes that got them to this point, right? Starting with Gordon Hayward. Gordon Hayward, nice guy. He's really nice. He's a good player. But that wasn't really a good signing, to sign him to $30 million for him to get hurt. Not his fault. His second year, he's playing on the bench, off the bench, not really 100%. Third year comes back. He's kind of in a weird spot, not really a part of the team. And then he just leaves for nothing, right? That is a critical free agency mistake, especially considering the fact that they didn't get anything in return. There are reports that Danny Ainge had the opportunity to conduct a sign and trade Gordon Hayward for Miles Turner and more, and he declined it. Having Miles Turner on this roster in 2020-2021 would make that Boston Celtics team better, more complete, fix a lot of defensive issues, fix a lot of offensive issues, and just make the team better. Like, I'm just confused why he would not get at least something in return for the Gordon Hayward mistake. Like, I hate to use the word mistake, but that's what it was. It was a mistake. And Miles Turner is more than something. He is an amazing young player who is in Defensive Player of the Year conversations. He's good at blocking, good at protecting the rim, protecting the paint. He could have really fixed, or what's the word? Trying to find the word for fixing a problem. I can't think of it at the top of my head because this is unscripted, but you know what I mean. Like, really redeem. There you go. Redeem the Gordon Hayward signing by getting Miles Turner. Yep. Nope. Doesn't do it. And what does he do instead? He gets Tristan Thompson and Jeff Teague. Tristan Thompson, I like him. He's been injured He's been disappointing. Jeff Teague, he's been awful, and he just got waived, right? Not really good decisions by Danny Ainge, right? And then we have to talk about Kemba. I love Kemba. He's really nice. He's a really nice guy, and I like him personally. And I really do like his game. I like his game a lot, especially when he was in Charlotte. But he just hasn't been good, especially in proportion to his contract. And that's sucking a lot of money to get good players, right? So Danny Ainge's free agency mistakes kind of got them to this point where, sure, they have Tatum and Brown. You can even argue if those draft picks didn't hit, like I want to give Danny Ainge credit for drafting Tatum and Brown, but if those didn't hit, then the Celtics would be screwed right now. And then on top of that, not having the opportunity to surround Brown and Tatum with the best pieces to win because of the Kemba signing is really not a good look for Danny Ainge, right? So, in essence, what's wrong with the Celtics? It's roster construction. Kind of Brad Stevens. It's a little too early for that. Defense, the fact that they allowed a third most field goal attempts and allowed a sixth most field goal made. And Danny Ainge's blunders over the past couple years, that really put them in an awkward situation where the Celtics literally have a worse record than the Knicks.